The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the lamp on Ethan's desk. The light bathed the study in a warm glow, but no warmth reached him. He stood there, motionless, a photograph clutched in his hands. Safia's face stared back at him, her smile as radiant as the day he had met her. Yet that same smile now felt like a puzzle, one he was no closer to solving than when they first crossed paths. How could he have been so blind? The question gnawed at him, but no answer came. His mind spiraled, replaying their moments together, searching for signs, for clues. She had been everything he wasn't: humble, kind, unpretentious. She said she loved him, and he had believed her. But now that certainty felt like sand slipping through his fingers. It had been raining that evening. The diner was small, unassuming, the kind of place he would never have stepped into if not for sheer exhaustion. But something about it felt comforting. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, the smell of fresh coffee and warm bread wrapping around him like a blanket. She had been there, bustling between tables with a smile that could light up a stormy night. "Rough day?" she had asked, her voice carrying the kind of warmth that made you believe everything could be okay. He hadn't meant to stay long, but something about her made him linger. Her laugh was soft, unforced. Her presence felt real in a way he hadn't experienced in years. For once, someone wasn't trying to impress him or gain something from him. That evening turned into another and then another. He returned to that diner far more often than his busy schedule should have allowed. She became his escape, his reminder that life could be simple and beautiful. It wasn't long before he found himself wanting more. In the park that evening, the words came easier than he had expected. The ring wasn't extravagant. He didn't want it to be. "Sophia," he had said, his voice steady, but his heart racing. "I don't need perfection. I just need you." Her hesitation had been brief, her eyes searching his as if trying to decide whether to leap. And then she smiled, tears glistening as she said, "Yes." But even then, there were signs. Little things he had brushed aside. The way she avoided questions about her past. The way her eyes dimmed ever so slightly when the topic veered too close to something personal. He had told himself it didn't matter. They were building a future, not digging through the rubble of the past. Now standing in his study, those signs felt like warning bells he had ignored. The photograph trembled in his hand as the weight of it all threatened to crush him. What had she been hiding? And why had she felt the need to hide it from him? 7 days. That's what the investigator had told him. 7 days and he would have answers. But the answers already felt like a knife hovering above his chest, ready to strike. Did he even want to know? The clock ticked, each second dragging him further into the unknown. 7 days to uncover the truth. 7 days to find out if the woman he had fallen for was who she said she was. The photograph fell to the desk, and he stared at it, the question echoing in his mind. What would you do if the person you gave your heart to turned out to be someone you never truly knew? The room grew darker, but Ethan didn't move. He just stood there, bracing himself for what was to come. Ethan Carrington stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse. The glittering city skyline sprawled out before him. To anyone looking in from the outside, he had it all. An empire built from nothing, a name synonymous with success, and wealth that could buy almost anything. But as he gazed at the world he conquered, all he felt was emptiness. He had spent years building walls, shutting people out, and it had worked. He was untouchable. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the world stopped demanding from him, loneliness seeped through the cracks. Trust didn't come easily anymore. Everyone seemed to want something. A handshake masked an ulterior motive. A smile hid expectations. Ethan had learned to read people like a business deal, always calculating, always questioning. But there was a part of him, buried under the layers of cynicism, that yearned for something real, something no amount of money could buy. Sophia Dawson couldn't have been more different. The morning sun streamed through the small windows of the diner where she worked, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with the warmth of pancakes on the griddle. Sophia moved through the room with a grace that belied the chaos of the breakfast rush. Her smile was infectious, her laugh like a melody that lingered long after it was heard. Life hadn't been kind to her, but she carried her challenges with quiet strength. Customers adored her, not just because she remembered their orders, but because she made them feel seen. Sophia wasn't just serving food, She was serving hope in a world that often felt devoid of it. Despite her struggles, she greeted each day with optimism, her kindness a light that refused to be dimmed. That light was the first thing Ethan noticed when he stumbled into the diner one rainy evening. He was exhausted, his tie loosened, his shoes wet from the downpour. The small bell above the door jingled as he entered, shaking droplets from his coat. The diner wasn't the kind of place he frequented, but tonight he needed something. He wasn't sure what. Sophia noticed him right away. "Rough day?" she asked with a gentle smile, placing a menu in front of him. Her voice carried a warmth that made him pause. "Something like that," he replied, his usual guarded tone softened by her presence. She nodded knowingly as if she understood without needing an explanation. "How about the house special? It's good for the soul." Ethan wasn't sure why, but he nodded. Over the next 20 minutes, as he watched her move from table to table, something shifted. She wasn't trying to impress him, wasn't trying to get anything from him. She was just herself. He found himself returning the next evening, and the one after that. At first, it was the food. At least, that's what he told himself. But soon, it became clear it was her. Sophia's laughter, her unassuming nature, her ability to make him feel like just another person, not the Ethan Carrington. Their conversations grew longer. She told him about her love of baking, about the old recipe her grandmother had passed down to her. In return, he shared stories of his childhood, moments he hadn't spoken of in years. When the coffee machine broke, he rolled up his sleeves and fixed it, much to her surprise and delight. "Didn't think you'd know your way around tools," she teased, and he laughed, a real, unguarded laugh. For the first time in years, Ethan felt connected. It wasn't just the diner or the food. It was her. It was in that same park, months later, that Ethan took her hand and said, "Sophia, I don't want the life I've built if it doesn't have you in it." He pulled a small ring from his pocket, nothing flashy, just simple and meaningful. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes. She hesitated, just for a moment, as if weighing something heavy in her heart. Then she nodded. "Yes, Ethan. 100 times yes." But there were things she didn't say. Ethan noticed how she dodged questions about her past, how she would change the subject when he got too close. "The past doesn't matter," she'd say. "What matters is here now." And for a while, he let himself believe that. When they decided to marry, it wasn't in a grand ceremony. It was quiet, just the two of them. They didn't want the scrutiny of Ethan's world or the judgment of those who wouldn't understand. Their love was theirs alone, too pure to be tainted by the noise of society. Still, there was a veil of mystery around Sophia, a shadow she carried but never explained. Ethan chose to ignore it, convinced that whatever it was, it didn't change who she was now. He loved her, and that was enough. Or so he thought. Ethan's world was one of polished surfaces and sharp edges, a life shaped by control and precision. But even he couldn't control the whispers that had begun to ripple through his circle. His family, once cordial about Sophia, now carried an edge to their words. It started subtly, the casual comment about her different upbringing during dinner, a raised eyebrow when she spoke of her work at the diner. The tone changed when James Whittaker, his business partner, took it upon himself to voice what others wouldn't. "You've got to be careful, Ethan," James said one evening, his voice low but firm. "A man like you, with everything to lose, can't afford to make decisions based on emotion. Do you really know who she is?" Ethan brushed it off, laughing lightly. "Sophia's as genuine as they come. Not everyone has an agenda, James." But James didn't relent. "Maybe not everyone, but don't let her modest background fool you. People know how to play the part. I've seen it before." The words lingered, unwelcome and persistent, like a splinter lodged deep. Ethan didn't want to believe it, yet the more he tried to push them away, the more they gnawed at the edges of his mind. At home, Sophia's once effortless warmth began to feel distant. She started slipping out for hours without explanation, returning with vague responses that didn't quite satisfy. The phone calls came next, short, whispered conversations that ended abruptly when Ethan entered the room. He tried to ignore it at first. Maybe she just needs space, he told himself. But the unease grew, a slow-burning fire in his chest. One evening, he finally asked, keeping his tone light to mask his growing concern, "You've been quiet lately. Is something on your mind?" Sophia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just a lot going on. Nothing for you to worry about." But he was worried. The woman who had once felt like an open book now seemed to be closing chapter after chapter, leaving him in the dark. The tension between them finally snapped one night. Ethan couldn't hold it in any longer. "Sophia," he said, his voice sharper than he intended, "what's going on? You've been distant, secretive. If something's wrong, just tell me." Her expression shifted, a flicker of frustration breaking through her usual calm. "Why can't you just trust me, Ethan? Not everything needs an explanation." "Not everything, maybe. But this is different." She shook her head, her voice softening but still firm. "I love you. Isn't that enough?" He wanted to say yes, to let the conversation end there, but the doubt was louder than his heart. The silence between them stretched, heavy and unresolved. It didn't help that James kept pushing. "See," he said one day at the office, leaning in conspiratorially. "You've noticed it too, haven't you? She's hiding something. You owe it to yourself to find out what." Ethan hated how easily James's words slipped into the cracks already forming in his trust. And yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. That night, alone in his study, Ethan made the call. The private investigator's voice was calm, professional. "I'll start with her background, see what I can find. It'll take about a week." As he hung up, a pang of guilt washed over him. Was this what their love had come to? Secret investigations, questions where there should have been trust. But he couldn't stop now. He needed answers, even if he feared what they might reveal. The first report came 3 days later. "There are gaps in her records," the investigator said, his tone measured. "Places she's lived, jobs she's worked. Some of it doesn't add up." Ethan's stomach tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying there's more to her story than she's told you." The next report came with photos. Sophia in a part of town he'd never seen her visit, speaking with an older woman whose face was lined with years of struggle. "Who is she?" Ethan asked. "That's Margaret," the investigator replied. "She runs a shelter for women in need. Your wife has been visiting her regularly. Beyond that, I'm still looking." Ethan stared at the photos, his heart pounding. What was she doing there? Why hadn't she told him? In the days that followed, memories of their happiest moments together played on a loop in his mind. Her laugh, her kindness, the way she had made him feel like the man he wanted to be. But those memories now felt tainted, overshadowed by the questions he couldn't answer. Was she hiding from him or protecting something? Was her love real, or had it been a facade all along? The doubt was a heavy weight, pulling him deeper into his own thoughts. Yet, in the midst of it all, one truth remained. He still loved her. And that love, as battered as it was, refused to let go. Ethan resolved to uncover the truth, not because of James's warnings or the investigator's findings, but because he needed to know, once and for all, whether the woman he had given his heart to was the same woman standing by his side. Ethan hadn't slept in days. The question swirled in his mind, keeping him awake as the city outside his window drifted into quiet. Each time Sophia left the house without explanation, each whispered phone call deepened the chasm between them. He told himself it was just his imagination, that love required trust, but doubt had a way of seeping into every corner of his heart. One evening, as she slipped out the door again, Ethan grabbed his coat. He followed her at a distance, the shadows of the dimly lit streets his only companion. She moved with purpose, her pace steady, her head down. He trailed her through unfamiliar neighborhoods, the polished elegance of their world giving way to crumbling facades and cracked sidewalks. Ethan's heart pounded not just from the exertion, but from the weight of what he was doing. Was this love? Watching her from the shadows, searching for answers in the places she wouldn't share. He wanted to stop, to turn back, but something inside him kept him moving forward. She stopped in front of a small, weathered building, the paint peeled from its walls, and a faded sign above the door read, "Community Shelter." He watched as she knocked, the door opening to reveal an elderly woman with kind eyes and a weathered face. The woman smiled warmly, pulling Sophia into an embrace. Ethan stayed hidden, his breath shallow. The scene before him raised more questions than it answered. Who was this woman? What was Sophia doing here? He watched as they disappeared inside, leaving him standing alone in the cold. The next evening he returned, determined to learn more. He waited until Safia left, then approached the building. The same woman answered, her expression cautious but not unkind. "I need to know about Safia," he said, his voice steady but laced with desperation. The woman hesitated, her hand lingering on the doorframe. "Safia doesn't know you're here, does she?" Ethan shook his head. "She's my wife, and she's hiding something. Please, I just want the truth." She sighed, stepping aside to let him in. The room was modest but welcoming, with worn furniture and the faint scent of fresh bread. "Safia's been coming here for years," the woman began. "Her heart is bigger than her fears, even if she doesn't always show it." She went on to explain how Safia had been quietly supporting the shelter with what little she earned, using her time and money to help those who had nowhere else to turn. "She doesn't talk much about herself," the woman continued, "but I know she's been through a lot, more than most could bear." Ethan felt the weight of her words settle over him. Safia, the woman he had doubted, was carrying a burden he hadn't even begun to understand. The pieces of her life began to fall into place as Ethan pieced together the story Margaret shared. Safia's upbringing had been far from the life Ethan knew. She had grown up in a home filled with anger and fear, her childhood shaped by moments of survival rather than joy. As a teenager, she had fled, determined to build a life where kindness could thrive, even if it meant carrying the scars of her past in silence. Ethan's mind raced as he recalled moments from their relationship. The times she had deflected his questions about her past, the way her eyes dimmed when certain topics arose. It wasn't deceit, he realized. It was protection, not for herself, but for him. As he walked home that night, guilt gnawed at him. He had doubted her, let others' voices seep into his mind, when all along, she had been quietly living a life of sacrifice. The doubt should have ended there, but James wasn't finished. The next day at work, James cornered him, his tone sharp. "You still think she's perfect? What are you hiding, Ethan? Or is she that good at keeping you in the dark?" Ethan clenched his fists, the guilt and anger boiling just beneath the surface. "Stay out of this, James." But James leaned in, his words deliberate. "You think you know her, but if you're wrong, you'll lose everything." Ethan's heart was torn. Margaret's words had painted Safia as selfless and kind, but James's warnings tugged at his insecurities. He needed to confront her, to hear the truth from her lips. That evening, he sat alone in their home, memories of their happiest moments flashing before him. The way she laughed when he tried to cook, the nights they stayed up late talking about their dreams. But those memories were now colored by doubt, the question of whether he had ever truly known her haunting him. By the time she walked through the door, he had made up his mind. It was time to stop running from the truth. Ethan sat alone in the dimly lit study, the envelope resting heavily in his hands. His heart raced, each beat louder than the last. The evidence he gathered sat on the desk before him, staring back like an accusation. Safia's mysterious past, the gaps in her story, the late-night phone calls. It all pointed to something he couldn't ignore any longer. But what if he was wrong? The thought of losing her tore at him, but so did the weight of his suspicions. The sound of the front door closing snapped him from his thoughts. She was home. He stood, his resolve solidifying with each step toward the living room. Safia looked up as he entered, her face lighting up briefly before dimming as she noticed the tension in his expression. "Ethan?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "We need to talk," he said, his voice trembling, not with anger, but with the sorrow of what he was about to say. Her eyes searched his face, and she nodded. "All right, what's on your mind?" He hesitated for a moment, then laid it all out. "The phone calls, the late nights, the things you won't tell me. I can't do this anymore, Safia. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when I know you're hiding something." She froze, the color draining from her face. "Ethan, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." His voice broke, the frustration and pain spilling out all at once. "Help me understand why the woman I marry feels like a stranger." Tears welled in her eyes, and she sank into the chair behind her. "You wouldn't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Try me," he urged, softer now, his anger giving way to desperation. Safia's hands trembled as she wiped at her eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just..." I didn't want you to see me differently." Her voice cracked, and she looked up at him, her gaze filled with a mixture of fear and sorrow. "The truth is, I grew up in a world you can't imagine. A world where survival was the only goal. I left it behind because I had to. I thought, if I told you, you'd never look at me the same way again." Ethan stood frozen, her words hitting him like a wave. He could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of a past she had tried so hard to leave behind. Before he could respond, the door swung open and James Whittaker stepped inside uninvited, holding an envelope in his hand. "Sorry to interrupt," James said, his tone smug, "but I think it's time we all had some honesty in this room." Sophia's face hardened, her tears replaced by a look of quiet resignation. Ethan turned to James, his jaw tightening. "What are you doing here?" James ignored him, holding the envelope out. "This is what you've been looking for, Ethan. The truth about your wife." Ethan hesitated, his hand hovering over the envelope. He glanced back at Sophia, who met his gaze with a calmness that unnerved him. "You already know what's in there," she said softly. His fingers shook as he opened it. The room seemed to grow quieter with each passing second. As his eyes scanned the documents, the truth unraveled before him. Sophia was the sole heir to a massive fortune left by her estranged parents who had passed away years ago. The wealth was unimaginable, yet she had chosen a modest life, dedicating herself to helping those in need. He looked up, his voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sophia's expression softened. "Because it doesn't matter. That money, that life, it's not who I am. I've spent years trying to use it to do something good, to help others. I didn't want it to change the way you saw me, the way you loved me." The words hit Ethan like a blow. Flashbacks of her kindness, her quiet generosity, flooded his mind. The way she always put others before herself, the sacrifices she had made without ever seeking recognition. James's voice cut through the silence. "See, she's been lying to you this whole time. What else is she hiding?" Ethan turned to him, his anger sharp and clear. "You need to leave." James smirked but said nothing, retreating out the door. When Ethan turned back to Sophia, his face was filled with regret. "I let my doubts get the better of me. I let other people's voices drown out what I knew in my heart. I'm so sorry, Sophia. You didn't deserve that." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief. "I just wanted you to see me for who I am, not where I came from." Ethan stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I do. I see you now. And I love you more than ever." In that moment, the weight of their challenges seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of understanding and hope. Together, they vowed to move forward, stronger for the battles they had faced, and ready to build a future rooted in love and trust. Ethan stood in the quiet of their living room, the weight of the past weeks pressing on his chest. Across from him, Sophia sat in a small armchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes searching his for some sign of what would come next. He took a step forward, then another, until he was close enough to take her hands in his. "I see it all now," he began, his voice steady but soft. "I see the strength it took to carry what you've carried, and I see how my doubt made that burden even heavier." Sophia's lips parted as if to respond, but he shook his head gently, signaling her to let him continue. "I should have trusted you. From the beginning, I should have seen you for the person you've always been, the woman who gave so much without asking for anything in return." Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she said nothing, letting his words hang in the space between them. Ethan knelt before her, his hands tightening around hers. "I promise you, from this moment forward, I will never let fear or doubt cloud what we have. You are my everything, Sophia. I trust you, I love you, and I always will." Sophia let out a soft, shuddering breath, the tension melting from her shoulders. She reached out, cupping his face in her hands. "I forgive you, Ethan. I know how hard it is to let go of fear. But we're here now together, and that's all that matters." They sat there, the silence filled with the unspoken understanding of two people who had weathered a storm and emerged stronger. In the days that followed, their conversations became deeper, more meaningful. They talked late into the night, revisiting memories both joyful and painful, piecing together the lessons their journey had taught them. Ethan shared how societal pressures had shaped his insecurities, and Safia spoke openly about her past, her struggles, and her desire to make a difference in the world. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Ethan said, "Safia, what if we use this, everything we have, to do something bigger? To change lives the way you've already been doing on your own?" Safia looked at him, her eyes wide with both surprise and hope. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, leaning forward, "let's combine our resources. Let's create something lasting. A foundation that helps kids who face what you faced, families who need a second chance, communities that need a little light in their lives." Her smile grew slowly, spreading warmth through the room. "Do you really think we could do that?" "I know we can," he replied. "You've already shown me what's possible when someone cares enough to act. Imagine what we could do together." And so, the dream took shape. They poured their time and energy into building a foundation that would focus on education, housing, and support for abused and neglected children. Safia's personal experiences gave their work a depth of understanding and compassion that made it all the more impactful. Ethan, once so consumed by the pursuit of wealth, found a new purpose in transforming that wealth into a force for good. As the foundation grew, so did their love. Each project, each life they touched, became a testament to the bond they had rebuilt. Their story began to inspire others, friends, colleagues, even strangers, who saw in them the power of forgiveness and the beauty of using life's challenges to fuel positive change. Ethan often reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The doubts, the mistakes, the moments of despair, they all seemed distant now, like shadows that had faded with the dawn. What remained was the light of a love that had been tested and proven unbreakable. He looked at Safia one evening as they walked through a newly opened shelter funded by their foundation. "If I've learned anything," he said, "it's that the world is full of people who are more than what they seem. And if we give them a chance, we might just find they have more to teach us than we could ever imagine." Safia squeezed his hand, her smile gentle. "And if we look for the good in others, we'll find it. Every time." As the story draws to a close, the audience is left with a powerful message. Trust and understanding are the foundations of love. Ethan and Safia's journey is a reminder that even in the face of doubt, love has the power to heal, to inspire, and to transform. The video ends with a simple invitation. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the greatest gift we can give one another is the chance to be seen for who we truly are. Stories like Ethan and Safia's remind us of the incredible resilience of the human spirit, the ability to rise above doubt, to heal, and to love again. Every person carries a story within them, a journey shaped by struggles, triumphs, and moments of clarity. Now it's your turn. Share your story. Have you faced challenges that tested your strength? Moments that redefined your relationships or transformed your perspective? We'd love to hear about them in the comments. Your words could inspire someone else to keep going, to believe that brighter days are ahead. If this story moved you, there's more to come. Subscribe to our channel and join a growing community of people who find hope and inspiration in the everyday lives of others. Together, we celebrate stories that touch the heart and remind us of what truly matters. And finally, don't keep this story to yourself. Share it with friends and family. Spread its message of love, trust, and understanding. You never know whose life you might brighten or whose perspective you might change. Let's create a ripple of kindness, one story at a time.